Hi friends, thank you for taking time out of your week to spend a little with me. I appreciate you. This week I wanted to share a case with you that I stumbled upon. I haven't heard of it and thought maybe you haven't either. So I ask you all to join me as we remember Marilyn Scheckler and Glenn Eckert, the victims of the Dreamland Park murders. August 12, 1969 in Berks County, Pennsylvania. Marilyn Scheckler was born in 1951. She was a recent graduate of Franklin Regional High School. During her time in school, she was popular amongst peers as the mascot for the sports teams and a great swimmer. Originally from Murraysville, Pennsylvania, Marilyn left her hometown shortly after her 18th birthday. She moved in with her brother Grant in Exeter Township in the summer of 1969. She found work as a cashier in a restaurant called the Country Kitchen, which was located inside of Boss Gove's department store. These restaurants were owned by Charles Eckert, and during the summer, his son Glenn worked for him. Glenn Eckert was born on December 2, 1948 in Pennsylvania. He graduated from Conrad Weiser High School in 1967. One of Glenn's duties for Country Kitchen was to make rounds collecting the daily deposits, which is how he met Marilyn. On this particular day, Glenn made 3 stops and collected $489. He made plans with Marilyn to go on a date that evening. He agreed and asked him to pick her up from her brother's home. Hours passed and Glenn arrived around 9 p.m., where he explained the two were going on a drive. They stayed around 30 minutes before heading out. This was the last time they were seen alive. The following morning, Charles Eckert realized his son never made it home and reported him missing. Initially, police thought the couple ran off to attend Burning Man, but Charles suspected foul play. He claimed his son wouldn't do such a thing, and Charles couldn't have been more right. In the late 60s, Reading, Pennsylvania became the home to the Pagan Motorcycle Club. The Pagans held 2 clubhouses in the area to house their members and host illegal activities. One clubhouse was located in an abandoned airport hangar, and the other was Dreamland Park. Dreamland Park opened to the public in 1939. It was purchased by Alton Creets, who then allowed his brother Ralph to convert the 17 acres into a place of amusement. It provided several carnival rides and general picnic areas for families to spend the day together. On the surface, Dreamland was just a theme park, but in reality, it was a cover for illegal gambling. Ralph, who had ties to the mafia, made a fortune on these illegal gambling rings. He started with his athletic clubs before moving his sites to other establishments around Berks County. He grew his gambling business by funding private improvement loans to fellow businessmen at a 25% interest rate. He would then have them agree to install machines where the owner would pay Ralph 50% of the profits. Ralph was able to carry out his illegal doings due to paid police informants. Ralph was popular amongst the working class and beloved by the community. He improved well-known businesses and donated to the poor and local churches. Despite his reputation, however, his crimes caught up to him in 1948 when he was convicted of tax evasion. 2 years later, the IRS seized his businesses, and Ralph was sentenced to 4 months in prison. Dreamland was among the properties seized to pay back taxes, so in 1956 it closed to the public. Sometime after its closure, Musa Eways purchased the property. Musa's son James was a 19-year-old member of the Pagan Motorcycle Club and allowed his friends to set up shop. On the same evening that Marilyn and Glenn went missing, another horrific crime occurred. James Butcher and 2 of his friends got lost near Dreamland Park. They turned down the wrong road. It was a dead end with a locked gate. Seeing no other options, they tried to reverse their vehicle when they realized they were blocked in. Behind them, a van and several men stood. They pulled James and his friends out of the car. The men assaulted James and his friends before one of them asked James if he knew what a knife could do to a person. James stated no before being stabbed. The assailants let the group go, threatening that if they told anyone, they would murder their families and burn down their houses. James arrived home that night and had no intentions of relaying his experience, but due to the severity of his wound, his brother-in-law convinced him to go to the hospital. At the hospital, James spun a different story to the doctor. He claimed he cut himself on a Coca-Cola bottle, but based on the condition of his injuries, the doctor knew it was a lie. Eventually, the truth came out, and the incident was reported to police, who knew exactly who was responsible. That night, police arrived at Dreamland Park and arrested several of the pagan club members who matched the description provided by James. They were questioned, but ultimately no one was charged since no one would confess to the crime. Berks County had no experience with gangs, and their arrival was not pleasant. 3 days after the assault and news of the missing couple, a meeting was held between the public and supervisors of the county. Locals expressed concern over Dreamland Park and the general safety of the area. After the stabbing, they wanted police to monitor the area often. A letter was sent to the owner of Dreamland, where the township expressed their displeasure of the gang living in the park. Nothing seemed to come from this since the pagans continued to live at the park for several months. The concerns of Dreamland Park still lingered. At the time, police didn't think the disappearance and assault were connected, but then Glenn's car was found. 6 days after Marilyn and Glenn disappeared, Glenn's car was discovered. The car was found in Leesport, around 20 minutes from Ruscombe Manor Township. It was abandoned. Inside the car were the couple's shoes, Glenn's shirt, and a bag containing $489. But no sign of the couple. Based on the location, police started to piece that the pagans might be responsible for their disappearance. For weeks, they searched the densely wooded area around Dreamland Park. It wouldn't be until late October that they finally got a break. On October 23, 1969, while searching the woods, a state trooper who was part of the ground search noticed sunlight shining off of something covered by rocks. Upon further investigation, the light came from the sun reflecting off of a pair of glasses. About a quarter mile from the entrance of the defunct Dreamland, the decomposed body of an unidentified man was found. On the ground next to the victim was a class ring from Conrad Weiser High School. Nearly 24 hours later, another body was discovered. About 200 yards north of the first victim was another decomposed body left in a shallow grave next to a stone wall. The body still wore a yellow mini dress, a girdle, and a pearl ring on its right hand. The bodies were removed for autopsies and identification. Police were convinced the pair were murdered before the reports were complete. Based on dental records, the bodies were identified as Marilyn Scheckler and Glenn Eckert. Tests were conducted by a pathologist at St. Joseph Hospital, where the cause of death was not revealed, but they were able to piece together their fates. Based on fractures and wounds present, it was believed both victims were beaten, and Glenn may have been shot. Marilyn's skull was smashed and had a break in the rear and on the left side. Glenn's facial bones were fractured, and holes were discovered in his forehead and on the right side of his head, which appeared to be bullet wounds. They placed the murders between midnight and 9 a.m. It wasn't long before police were back at Dreamland, rounding up more bikers. Among those arrested was James Eways. James was encouraged by his father to tell the truth about what happened that night. In August, Burt County held the fair, and the pagans hosted friends from other states at Dreamland Park so they could attend the fair, enjoy the town, and chase women. According to James, he and another member of the pagans, Leroy Stoltzfus, were in charge of welcoming the guest. Leroy was the son of a Mennonite bishop, and he left the church as soon as he could. He joined the Air Force, where he was eventually discharged. He had a love for bikes and found himself a part of the pagans. Leroy and James were responsible for out-of-towners Robert Martin Locke, member of the Thunderbolts Club in Selden, New York, and Harlan Bailey, another Thunderbolt from Florida. The four hung out together on August 12th, where they attended the fair. After some time passed, they found the fair to be lackluster, so they piled into a van and decided to find some women instead. But rather than girls, they found a couple. It was nearly midnight when they spotted a light blue car parked along Skyline Drive, and unfortunately, it was a wrong time, wrong place scenario. James stayed in the van, while Harlan took the driver's seat of the car. Leroy and Robert slid into the back seat to control the couple. James followed the car to Leesport, where it was abandoned. Robert then used the gun to force Glenn and Marilyn into the van with the bikers, and made the drive back to Dreamland. On the ride back, James claimed Glenn's shirt was used as a makeshift blindfold. Then the rest of the bikers took turns assaulting Marilyn. When they arrived back at Dreamland Park, they noticed heavy police activity. This was enough to deter them from stopping, so instead, they drove further up the road and left the vehicle. The victims were then taken into the woods by Leroy and Robert. According to James, he and Harlan were not involved with the deaths of the couple. After Leroy and Robert left, James took Harlan to a nearby service station to make a call, where they were later arrested as part of the James Butcher investigation. Leroy and Robert were later picked up at Dreamland Park as part of the same investigation. After James confessed, the other men were arrested on October 29, 1969, for the charge of murder. Leroy and Robert did not admit to anything. Harlan was the next to talk. His series of events were similar to James, and he denied having any part in the murders. He also indicated that James and himself left when the couple was still alive. He walked detectives through the night from the fair to abducting the couple to being back at Dreamland. He claimed Robert had a gun during the abduction, so he was in control of the hostages. Harlan also stated while he was in custody, he spoke to Leroy, where he asked what happened, and Leroy claimed it was taken care of. Harlan did not have a chance to speak to Robert. During this alleged conversation with Leroy, Harlan stated he took responsibility for killing Marilyn, and then stated Robert shot Glenn. Both men were asked to testify against their friends in exchange for immunity for their parts in the crime, and both James and Harlan agreed. Leroy and Robert's cases were referred to the grand jury, who determined each suspect would stand trial on the charge of murder. Robert went first. Jury selection began on June 1, 1970, and testimony started the following Wednesday. Both Harlan and James testified against him. Robert testified in his own defense, and during his 2.5 hours on the stand, he denied murdering Glenn, but did admit to being at the fair with the men. They decided to get some sodas from the store on their way back to the park when they encountered police. He and Leroy walked through the woods and into the park, where he heard police hitting 3 fellow members and asking for himself and Leroy. Instead of getting mixed up in the commotion, he claimed he and Leroy hid in a crawl space for 7 or 8 hours before heading back through the woods to a nearby hotel. He stated he never saw the couple and didn't take part in any abductions, assaults, or murder. On June 13, 1970, the jury deliberated for 5.5 hours before they returned the verdict of guilty for the murder of Glenn Eckert. Robert was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Leroy's jury selection concluded on September 30th. A change of venue was requested due to the extensive coverage, but was denied. His trial unfolded much like Robert's had, where both James and Harlan testified against him. Harlan testified Leroy admitted to killing Marilyn to him. He claimed he tried to choke her, but when he failed to do so, he smashed her in the head with a rock. During his tearful testimony, Leroy claimed it was Harlan who murdered Marilyn, stating Harlan had the gun and he beat her with the butt of it. He then pointed the finger at James for killing Glenn. Leroy stated when James and Harlan returned with the couple at gunpoint, Glenn tried to take the gun from James, and during the scuffle, the gun fired and killed the boy. James then held Leroy at knife point while Harlan murdered Marilyn. He stated the 3 men then forced him to bury the bodies. By October 13, 1970, the trial concluded and the jury delivered the verdict. Leroy was found guilty of the murder of Marilyn Scheckler and was also sentenced to life without parole. Both Leroy and Robert maintained their innocence. They both tried to appeal their cases while in prison, but were denied. Robert requested a new trial in 2007 on the basis that his original lawyers didn't properly investigate or defend his case. However, his motion was denied. Robert died in 2018 while incarcerated due to natural causes. Leroy died in 2010 from numerous health issues. Leroy's family continued to maintain his innocence and regretted that they were not able to protect him from the lifestyle. After the arrest and trials, the Pagans left Berks County, and the community were glad to see them go. They felt they were only out to hurt people. Harlan was not convicted of any crimes and disappeared from the headlines. James became a prominent businessman in the Reading area as the president of Mast Engineering. He ended up moving into a home in Wernersville. The area had a rich history of folklore, which attracted teens. During the early hours of June 15, 1996, 5 teens were driving up and down the street outside of James' home. According to him, they were shouting threats and shining lights into his windows. Eventually, James had enough and came outside with his .357 Magnum. He fired 2 shots. One of these bullets went through the passenger window of the car, hitting 17-year-old Michael Abate in the head. Unfortunately, Michael died hours later at the hospital. James initially denied firing the shots, but confessed to the crime and was arrested. The case went to trial in September of 1996, where a change of venue was granted due to his connection to the Dreamland Park murders. On October 1, 1996, after 7 hours of deliberation, James was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and 5 counts of reckless endangerment of another person. He was sentenced to the state prison for a term of 2 to 5 years. He was imprisoned on September 3, 1998, after exhausting his appeals. He served his whole sentence and was released in September of 2003. Much like Harlan, James is believed to be alive and keeping a low profile. Dreamland Park remained closed and is a dark landmark for the area. The last known sale of the property happened in May of 2021. Hi friends, if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. As always, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts, so leave them below and we can chat about this case. If you found this to be informative, please consider giving the video a thumbs up to let YouTube know you want more from me. And lastly, if you have not subscribed yet, you should, because we would love to have you under the ash tree. Thank you all for continuing to be supportive and kind, and just genuinely enjoying the content. It does mean the world to me. I appreciate you all and your time, but for now, we must part ways. So stay safe out there, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, friends.